You may think that there is so much information about diversity, equity, inclusion that it's hard to know where to start. I don't think that's true. I think you're approaching this in the wrong way, and I'm going to help you to get on the right track. I'm Dr. Jonathan. I work with organizations to make them inclusive, and I'm on a mission to help 1 million people like you to make your workplace inclusive. Get your pen and paper ready because we're discussing why you may feel overwhelmed with all the information about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've spoken to over 1,000 people about this topic over the past 14 years. So many people tell me that they feel overwhelmed by all the information that's out there. They tell me that it's tough to filter through everything to find what's relevant and trustworthy. They tell me that it feels as if there's new ideas, new research, new terminology emerging all the time. And this makes it really hard to keep up. And I empathize. I really do. I also tell all of these people the same thing and they never complain about being overwhelmed again. I used to have the same problem until I had an epiphany. And this changed the way I look at this whole thing. I tell them that there's no reason to be overwhelmed. There's no reason for you to be overwhelmed because not all of the information that's out there is intended to educate them. That means all of the information that's out there is not intended to educate you. A lot of the information is intended to entertain you. A lot of the information is intended to distract you. And a lot of the information is intended to sidetrack you. Once you understand that, not only will you not be overwhelmed, you'll realize that there isn't enough educational information or educational content out there for you. Now, the huge caveat here is that you are seeking information for education on your inclusion journey. I certainly am. When I describe this podcast, I say that every week we inform and educate using applied research and thought leadership. Now, sometimes I do laugh at the things I say on this show, but it's more awkward, a more inappropriate laugh at some of the bad habits that are out there and some of the catchphrases and the repetition that I do to really drill this into your head. I don't want to bore you to death, but this isn't meant to be a comedy podcast. I'm here to make your life easier. That's part of my mission. I'm not immune to this either, but I manage this in a number of ways. Now, step 1 is a low information diet. As a regular member of our audience, you already know that I am on a low information diet. That means no newspapers, no live TV, no radio. This makes me less vulnerable to the propaganda that populates this space and society in general. I spoke about this recently when talking about social media. I said using social media is like food shopping. When you eat healthy, you ignore most of what is on offer. When you eat healthy, you don't go down every aisle in the store. That's how I feel about information about diversity, equity, inclusion. That's how I feel about information in general. Now, step 2 is to pay attention to your consumption. Now, here are a few tips that I use to be intentional about what I consume. Number 1 is quality over quantity. Instead of trying to consume every piece of information out there, focus on high quality sources that provide valuable insights and actionable advice. 2, be mindful of the source. Check the credibility of the source before consuming information. Look for people with expertise in that area of diversity, in that area of inclusion, and who have a track record of producing informative and reliable content. 3, don't consume too much at once. Now, this one is really important. I avoid information overload by breaking up my consumption into smaller manageable chunks. There's a reason that this podcast typically is less than 10 minutes long, certainly less than 15. I want to make this easier for you. I personally limit the amount of time that I'm on social media and the amount of time that I spend reading. And let me give you one more. Take time to digest what you've consumed. Take time to reflect on what you've learned before moving on to the next piece of information. Take time to reflect on what you've learned and how you can apply it in your personal life or in your professional life. Now, you should consider discussing this with friends, with colleagues. That's what I want you to do each and every week with each and every episode of the show. Talk about it with someone. Now, what I've said is useful, but it's not always going to help you to distinguish between what's education and what's not. So let's pick entertainment and education as an example. Here's what I pay attention to when I'm trying to discriminate. I find that entertainment is about them, education is about you. I find entertainment is superficial and education offers more depth. I find entertainment expects you to take things for granted and education expects you to ask questions. I find entertainment does the thinking for you and education wants you to think for yourself. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, but it is a strong clue. I want to avoid being overwhelmed. That's why I use this to help me personally. Now, here's a great example that is common on social media. Selfie posts. Even better, selfie posts with books. Some people tell me they don't like them. I love them. Why? Because I know it's entertainment. It's not educational. It's not about me. It's not providing depth. It's not thought-provoking. Most of the time, people haven't read the book. I don't have a problem with that any more than I've got a problem with TV dinners. I just know that it's not meant for me. I'm not overwhelmed because it's not intended for me. I just go down a different aisle. I just try and consume something different. I just look at a different social media post or I read a different article. You should decide what you want to consume and why. And let's remember, I'm speaking in a very specific context here. In my personal life, I watch all sorts of weird and wonderful things because I want to be entertained, because I want to be distracted, because I want to be sidetracked. I just don't do that when I'm talking about inclusion. Because I want to stay on track, I want to help you to stay on track. And evidence-based inclusion is a great way to stay on track. I typically say that I like evidence-based inclusion because it allows you to pick up what everyone else has missed. In this context, I really like it because it allows you to miss things that you don't want to pick up. A lot of the information that you probably find overwhelming isn't educational, is not the research, is not from the organization, is not from stakeholders, and it's probably not enhancing your expertise. This is why I avoid it. This is why I'm not overwhelmed. And you don't have to be either. By the way, I'm not immune from this either. If you think that here we don't meet the standards that I've just set out, then maybe it's time for you to go down a different aisle too. So let's wrap this up. What are the key messages here? 1, not all information is there for your education. 2, consider having a low information diet. And 3, pay attention to what you consume. So what do you think? Are we meeting the standards that I suggested? Get in touch or leave a message. I would love to hear from you. If you've learned something from today's show, then give us a 5-star review and a comment wherever you're listening to the podcast. It helps other people like you to find the show. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.